Welcome to the Deep Dive. You give us the source material articles, bios, deep research, and we pull out the story. Today, we're looking at a career profile pieced together from Wikipedia entries and professional biographies, all focused on one person, Maria Bellucci, who was a huge figure in the European adult film scene.
It's a really fascinating set of documents because you get this super detailed look at how a career like that, a long-term one, gets recorded, especially across, so many different countries and languages.
Right. So our mission here is pretty straightforward. We're going to pull out the hard biographical facts, track where she worked and when, try to get a handle on the sheer number of films she made, and then look at the actual industry recognition she got. And everything we talk about comes directly from these sources you sent us.
We're basically just following the map laid out by her own professional record. And, the first thing that just jumps right out is how complicated her whole identity was.
Oh, absolutely. Maria Bellucci is the one everyone knows, but let's get into the person behind it. What's her actual story?
Okay, so her real name was Margit Anita Salente. She was born June 27, 1977, in a place called Karl-Marx-Stadt.
And for anyone who doesn't immediately recognize that name, that's in what used to be East Germany, Saxony. So on paper, she's German.
She is, but this is where it gets a little more complex. Her parents were Hungarian, and the sources were very clear that the family moved back to Hungary almost right after she was born.
So German birth certificate, but Hungarian nationality.
Exactly. Hungarian upbringing, Hungarian language. And that kind of dual identity is really key to understanding how her career moved across Central Europe later on.
That makes a lot of sense. It sets the stage. Now, before she got into the industry, what was she doing? I know the sources mentioned something very normal.
Yeah, she wasn't super interested in academics after her basic schooling. She trained as a hairdresser, and that's what she did for a job right up until 1996.
A hairdresser. Okay. So in the autumn of 96, she makes this huge career shift. Let's talk about the persona she built. The name Maria Bellucci. That's obviously not an accident.
No, not at all. It was actually very practical. The sources just say it was chosen because it, quote, sounds good. It has that Italian feel for that market. But maybe the bigger reason was a supposed resemblance to the actress Monica Bellucci.
Ah, okay. So it's instant name recognition, smart branding.
Very smart. And there was also this little connection where her birth name, Margit, is kind of a cousin to Maria. A little linguistic nod.
It's those little details.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of details, the profiles were incredibly specific about her physical stats.
Oh, yeah. Very specific. She was listed as 170 centimeters tall. Measurements were 90, 66, 90.
And the sources were very direct about her breast augmentation. They listed it as seno naturale, no. Some profiles even clarified that as medium fake tits. Just very clinical, very direct.
And if we're talking about complexity, we have to talk about the pseudonyms. Maria Bellucci was just the main one. If you really wanted to track her entire career, you'd be looking up names like Maria Soaline, Judith Rastic, Sylvia Dahl, Maria della Rovere.
The list in the documents is
Yeah.
It's huge. What does that tell us? Why so many different names?
It's all about market segmentation and longevity. Different names let you work for studios that are technically competitors, or you can have a different name for the Italian market versus the German market. It stops you from getting overexposed, and honestly, it just makes the contracts cleaner. It shows a real business mind behind the scenes.
That is a brilliant way of looking at it. The fragmented identity is actually a business tool.
Exactly. It's a tool for career maintenance.
Okay, let's use that as the bridge to our next section. The scale of her work. She starts in 1996, and her career goes until about 2014, so we're talking almost 20 years.
And that's where we run into a data problem. The numbers in the sources, they just don't agree. We've got one that says more than 200 films, another says 297 movies up to 2012, and then a third gives this really specific catalog number of 425 total films shot.
Okay, let's focus on those two big numbers. 297 unique titles versus 425 total films. That's a gap of over 100. What does that gap tell you about how the European industry worked?
It tells you the difference between shooting a new movie and, well, repackaging it. Those extra 128 films are almost certainly compilations, re-edits, or international versions. A scene shot for an Italian film might end up in a U.S. compilation years later under a totally different title.
So that 425 number,
Yeah.
That's probably the real measure of her commercial footprint.
I think so. It shows how much her library was being reused and resold globally.
And where was she doing all this work? You mentioned the German and Hungarian connection.
She started with some small production companies in Germany, but she pivoted pretty quickly. The main focus became Italy.
Right, Italy was a huge hub back then.
A huge hub. And by 2003, she made it official, signing exclusively with an Italian agency called Mover Agency. But at the same time, she didn't cut her other ties. In 2004, she also signed a big contract with a Hungarian company, Focus Video.
So she's got major deals in both Italy and Hungary at the same time.
Exactly. And that Hungarian deal led to a lot more than just film work. She was doing erotic festivals, live hard shows.
And for the listener, what does live hard shows actually mean in this context?
It means unsimulated, live adult performances on a stage in front of an audience. It's a completely different skill set from film. It takes a ton of stage presence and professionalism.
That really paints a picture of a very versatile, very high-stakes performer. And the sources say that right around that same time, 2004, she started to move into producing.
Yes, and this is a critical career move. She started producing her own films and usually starring in them herself. This isn't just a side project. It's about taking control, artistic control, financial control. You're not just talent for hire anymore. You're building an asset.
So she's managing this career with over 400 films, working live shows, and now she's a producer. Which brings us to industry recognition. With that much output, did her peers actually recognize the quality?
I did. We have very clear evidence of recognition from the U.S. industry, which is a big deal for a European performer. She got 2 separate nominations for an AVN Award.
Which is often called the Oscar of porn. It's basically the main benchmark for success in the American market.
Exactly. So for her to get nominated, it means her work was crossing over and getting noticed internationally.
What were the nominations for, specifically?
In 2007, she was nominated for Best POV Sex Scene in a film called POV Centerfolds 3. And then a couple years later, in 2009, a nomination for Best All-Girl Group Sex Scene for a movie called Girlgasmic.
So these are very specific technical performance categories. It shows she was respected for her actual craft.
Definitely. And you can see that range when you look at some of the film titles. Her Italian work for studios like Topline had titles like Il collega mi piace stretto or L'Educatrice. They feel more narrative, more stylized.
Right. But then you compare that to her international stuff for companies like Vivid or Private. Titles like Budapest Diary 2 or Euro Angel 16. That feels much more like big, global, high-concept productions.
And that's the key. She could move between those two worlds, the, sort of artsy Italian aesthetic and the more direct global product.
And she worked with some big names, right? The sources mentioned Joe D'Amato.
Yes. And working with a director like D'Amato, that's significant. He was a legendary and controversial figure in Italian genre film. He directed horror, westerns, everything. So being in one of his adult films wasn't just another job. It was an association with a known, if notorious, auteur.
Okay, so we've got a picture of someone at the absolute top of her field. 400-plus films, AVN nominations, working with famous directors. But this is where the source material gets, well, really fascinating and kind of meta.
Yeah. This is where the document itself starts analyzing its own reason for being. The Wikipedia source, which is where a lot of this is documented, actually contains a note from the editors questioning if the article itself should even exist.
They were debating whether her career was, what, encyclopedically relevant?
That's the exact phrase. They basically said, look, the long filmography and the AVN nominations, those are only clues of relevance.
Only clues.
Right. But they stressed they were not Dell-proof, not definitive proof. And the core argument was that an AVN award, even if it's called the Oscar of porn, just doesn't have the same specific weight as a mainstream Oscar.
So they're taking the standards of Hollywood and applying them to a completely different industry, based largely in Europe, and saying it doesn't measure up.
Precisely. They are using mainstream cultural yardsticks as the only valid ones. And by that logic, the highest possible achievements within this massive global industry, they just get dismissed.
And this is the big takeaway for you, the listener. It forces you to ask, if the usual standards don't fit, how should we measure relevance? How do you document a career like this?
I mean, you can't just ignore a career that spanned 2 decades and produced over 400 commercial products. If an AVN nomination isn't enough, then maybe you have to look at sales figures or her influence or her output as a producer. The data is there, but the cultural establishment isn't willing to validate it.
It really makes you think about whose history gets told and who gets to decide what counts as a successful career.
It's a great question. When someone hits the absolute top of their own specialized world, why does that achievement need to be rubber stamped by an outside system that might be hostile to it in the first place?
So let's bring it all together. Let's synthesize this journey.
We followed Margit Salente from her German birthplace and Hungarian home, from being a hairdresser to becoming Maria Bellucci, a performer who built a 2-decade career through sheer volume, smart pivots between Italy and Hungary, and eventually by becoming her own boss as a producer.
It's a case study in branding and professional resilience.
Absolutely. And that brings us back to that final, critical question the sources raise. If the only standard for relevance is mainstream awards, what other metrics could we possibly use to measure the impact of a career like this? Something beyond just that undeniable number of 400-plus films. And maybe more importantly, who gets to decide what that new standard should be? That's the question we'll leave with you.